Let's call the meeting to order. First and foremost, let's do a roll call. Clerk, if you would.
Love,
Here.
Perry,
Here.
Peter,
Here.
Spiker,
Here.
Eldorama, here.
All right, so first business today, we've got our minutes and from August 31st, 2022, and we will need a motion to approve those minutes
I'll move to approve the minutes.
and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All not in favor, say nay. And ayes have it. So we'll move on to our presentations for the evening. First and foremost, we were supposed to have Phil, but it looks like from the elections office, but we're going to move to our neighborhood association presentation. If you'd like to introduce yourself and you can have the floor.
Perfect. Hello, commissioners. Good afternoon. So loud. My name is Tiffany McCree, and I oversee our neighborhood associations as the Energize Our Neighborhoods program manager for the city, which really just means I'm the liaison between the city and our neighborhood associations. Today, I wanted to take this opportunity to share a little bit of background about our neighborhood associations, provide some insight into the size and activity of our neighborhood associations, and really give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. So in 1993, our neighborhood associations were created. Neighborhoods worked with our city staff to create their geographical boundaries. So as you may expect, neighborhood associations weren't all created at one time. So neighborhoods would come to our city staff and ask to become a formalized neighborhood association, in which we would use streets and markers within the community to provide geographical boundaries for those areas. Since then, we have been working with our planning staff and our planning and development services team to provide alignment for the planning areas and our neighborhood association boundaries. The most recently formed neighborhood association was West Boise, and that happened at the end of 2020. And that was the last time that we looked at our boundaries for our neighborhood associations. Currently, we have 35 established neighborhood associations and 2 inactive neighborhood associations, which are Somerset and Quail Ridge. Actually, go to the next slide. So here you can see the variety and size from our neighborhood associations, with 23, that purple area being the Southeast Neighborhood Association that has 16,000 households within that area. We also have the smallest neighborhood association, which is going to be that Glenwood Rim, number 12, tealish color on the map. And that sees 450 households within their area. Sometimes we do include our business community as well in our household count, just due to the land use. So in some, like the Downtown Neighborhood Association, we're including our households and our businesses within those areas. Typically, on average, our neighborhood associations are anywhere from 4,000 households to about 7,000 or 8,000. And really, this just provides you an overview of our activity. So 27 have newsletters and individual websites. We have 30 that utilize social media, 28 that send postcards out to our community, 10 that participated in National Night Out, and every neighborhood association meets at least once a year, with 30 receiving some type of funding from our program, whether it be the ACT mini grant or our neighborhood investment program. And really, this is just a snapshot into the activity of our neighborhood associations. A majority of them are well established. They understand how our program works and communicate and encourage and activate neighborhoods within our community. However, we do have some neighborhood associations who are either going through leadership transitions or rebuilding their neighborhood association who may not actively be participating in the programs that we currently offer. And really just wanted to stand for any questions that you all may have.
Chairperson Love, may I ask a question?
Absolutely. Chairman Peter?
Commissioner, you're.
Commissioner Peter,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yes, I live in the West Valley, which I guess is West Boise.
Mhm.
And so we're the newest. And I was totally unaware of it until this commission membership. So maybe you could tell me how they get organized and what information was sent out to the residents of that area. And how do we move forward to get funding, which is always nice for something.
So our neighborhood associations, they have to, actually, a lot of them do canvassing within their area. They sign a petition to see how many neighbors would potentially like to be included in their neighborhood association. They then bring it to the city and say, hey, we got a lot of this community support for organizing within our community. We then work with our city planners to look at what the geographical boundaries are. We also, myself, works with our neighborhood associations to say, do you want to be a 501c3? How do we get you activated within your community, whether it be getting flyers out, door knocking, all of these community engagement that we offer. And then a postcard goes out once neighborhood associations have kind of went through all of those steps, letting our residents know that this is going to be a formed neighborhood association in the upcoming months. So we do a lot of outreach, and we asked kind of for that at the forefront as well to get community buy-in from our neighbors within our community. The two funding mechanisms that we have are super awesome. We have the ACT mini grant, which provides funding for administration, celebration, implementation projects. That's a smaller bucket of money. It's up to $2,500 every year. And neighborhood associations just fill out an application online. And it's a reimbursement program. So they say, hey, I really want to do a celebration within our community. It's going to cost me $500. And we go through that process, and then we give them a check following that celebration. And then the other funding mechanism is our neighborhood investment program, which allocates up to $500,000 a year for capital improvement projects within our community. Again, same kind of thing where the neighborhood associations are filling out an application. It's a robust application, and then we review them internally, have them work with project managers because a majority of the time the projects are in larger scale. Working with project managers, we review them internally and then provide funding. I think we provided 10 neighborhood associations funding this year for a variety of different projects. So those are the two funding mechanisms. And I also would just like to note that Energize we are currently looking at the future of Energize. So hopefully within the next few weeks, we'll be coming to mayor and council with recommendations of how we can better support our community members and our neighborhood associations.
That's impressive. Does the city finance the acquisition of a 501c3? And I mean, that's fairly expensive.
It is. We typically reimburse it. We allow them to reimburse that cost. I believe it's about $900, but they only have to do it every few years, which is really awesome. So we do.
Okay. And do many of the associations, do they have dues, or how do they raise their own money?
So a variety of the neighborhood associations, we are not allowed to require dues, but they are allowed to ask for donations as well as host events. That's what a lot of our neighborhood associations do. Some provide partner with nonprofits and businesses within their communities to provide like in-kind donations or donation of services, which is awesome. But a majority of the funding does come from the city, I would say, for primarily a large component of our neighborhoods.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Tiffany,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're like, which one's talking? Which one did you say was the largest?
Southeast Neighborhood Association. So
23?
yes,
Okay. All right.
17,000 households.
Okay.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What would you say is the interest level in the districting commission's work amongst the neighborhood associations?
I would say that they're very interested. I probably get emails at least twice a week asking me when your guys' meetings are. So there is a high interest. I know that there actually has been a few neighborhood associations who are looking at maybe redoing their mapping. They haven't provided any formal letters, which is what we asked, which we will take to planning and development services, and we'll provide updates to you if that does occur. But currently, there has been a large interest in districting.
And what type of questions, I guess, are they asking?
What is happening? When are we going to know?
Would you say that there would be interest in like us sending out an information like to them about the mapping and when it's going to be available?
Yes, and we can provide any sort of emails. I can work with Hannah on that, providing them any sort of information. I do try and put any upcoming meetings on our calendar for our neighborhood association. So they are aware and they are invested in what is happening.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
We'll move on. Next, I see Phil's here, present for us from the elections office.
I apologize. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, commissioners. I apologize for being so late. I'm stretching myself too thin these days. So thank you for your patience, and hopefully it wasn't too disruptive. Chairwoman Love, it's good to see you again.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a little while. Kudos to being here and being involved in this process. I had reached out to Hannah in the city, just to have an opportunity to talk about how the work that you guys have been tasked with impacts us as an elections office, and just to give you some feedback and oversight, both about the statutory aspect of it. But I think one of the things, and I'm certain you probably recognize this, at the end of the day, the reason you're doing this is for elections, right? It's determining. So there's the representative piece, which I think you're going to spend a lot of time talking about. But in a practical matter, it's so that we can conduct elections and determine who's running for what, and being able to administer those elections. So our office is tasked with running all elections here in the county, everything from president all the way down to cemetery district commission seats, things you didn't even know existed. And so it's our responsibility to take the information, the output of what you do will be passed on to us in this process. So we probably have the strongest interest out of anybody in terms of how this works, just on a practical and a logistical matter. And that's kind of what I want to be able to talk about tonight. And it'll be pretty narrow in scope, and I'm happy to answer any questions along the way in terms of what does this mean for your work. I think you guys are just as at the outset in a really unique position because you're dealing with districting at, I know this will sound silly because it is the largest city, but at the smallest level. Right. Most districting happens on a much larger geographic level. So when you talk about things like communities of interest or anything, the larger geography, the more possible that is, the more narrow you get, the harder it is. We start splitting hairs in terms of the differences among people, right? Or in differences among geography. And I think that's one of the challenges you guys will be navigating. Plus you just have you actually with the city of Boise have some of the most interesting geographical limitations. It's not too different than when the redistricting commission for the state of Idaho, the state redistricting commission always starts in the panhandle because there's just not a lot of space around the panhandle. The city has kind of its own panhandle. It's just a weirdly shaped pan, right? And so I think you've got some interesting things to navigate in this process. I want to just real quickly start off by one of my largest motivations for reaching out. And I guess I shouldn't presume I'm making assumptions, but I like to think most of you have some idea who I am. I am the clerk for Ada County, hence why I oversee elections. And I'm a self-described elections junkie. Chairman Love and I have had the opportunity to work together in elections in this space. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully this is familiar. This is last year's map or the first redistricting for the city. The process, so I'm very happy to see the process that you're going through, not just for public input and participation, but also just a more formalized process. I think if you were to ask anybody involved, but particularly Jamie Sullivan and I worked very closely together trying to, for lack of better, we'll say unwind this because last year there was a short time frame. It was difficult for the city to figure out the process. The statutes are very vague, including what you're working with now in terms of how this should work. And so the city put forth a map. Where this became extremely problematic is when we received this information. So actually the map you're seeing right now is the most detailed version of a map that exists, right? This is extremely high level for our purposes because we have to determine down to a single registered voter and a single parcel who is eligible to vote in what. And this certainly did not provide that level of information. It wasn't until after this map had been approved that between the city attorney's office, our office, and then Eric Wing with GIS, that we all kind of coalesced. And unfortunately, because it had already been approved, we kept finding issues and there wasn't a clean mechanism to resolve those issues. I'm going to share some of those with you. For example, you wouldn't know this and you can't see it on this map, but these districts include areas that are not in the city limits, right? That's kind of problematic. Only people who are living within the city are eligible to vote in city elections. Despite we have a map that has people outside of cities. And actually, when you were just earlier, as I was looking at the neighborhood associations, one thing to consider is those neighborhood associations do not align with the city boundaries. And you do have certain, again, practical limitations that you have to navigate. And so just to give you a couple of examples of the things, and this will feed into my main point that we had to deal with. This is an example of the boundary line between districts. This is one instance. We'll talk a lot about precincts here shortly, but where a precinct was split. But you can also see it's not just like a precinct was split, but like next door neighbors are in different districts, despite they pretty clearly live right next, this is not what we like to see. I mean, the good news here is it didn't cut any houses in half. We have dealt with that in the past and trying to guess, is it the master bedroom or the front door? How do we determine? So they didn't do that, but you can easily see how this isn't just difficult for us to administer. I would say more importantly, it's very confusing for voters. They don't understand why, right? You have just the end of this little neighborhood and, a dozen houses are voting for in a different district than basically the rest of their neighborhood, right? And so we want to try and avoid things like that because we're the ones who have to navigate. And in our database and our information, we're the ones who have to make sure the right ballot goes to the right person. Similarly, here's another area, not quite as bad as the other spot. Everyone, I think, probably is familiar with where the VA is, but you can see where this district, if I had I can pull up a map where we can zoom in on this if you want, but you can see where common neighborhood areas are split in kind of odd ways. And again, we're the one, you won't be tasked with answering the questions. It'll be us at Ada County Elections when someone calls and say, this doesn't make sense. Why? I got the wrong ballot. That's usually the question we'll get. Right. I was talking to my neighbor and they're voting on city council member X and I got this one. You screwed up. I'm like, well, we didn't. And for our purposes, that's really important, especially right now, if there ever was a time, is just that in our world, not only causes confusion, but it erodes trust, right? People start to doubt the system on whether it's working properly, even though it is working properly. Thankfully, I'll say this doesn't relate to the work you're doing, but the city of Boise has done a very good job of annexing areas within the city. For example, in the neighboring city Meridian, we deal with a lot of issues where the city has not annexed parcels within the city. And so we'll have people who live like downtown Meridian and are upset that the mayor isn't on their ballot. And we're like, well, you don't live in the city. They're like, what are you talking about? I can see the library. Like, yes, that's true, but you don't live in the city. And we have to navigate some of these things, right? And these are the kind of challenges that we run into. My biggest request and push is, and I don't know, I'm going to assume people have started to give you legal advice in this process as you navigate things, but is the importance of precincts. There's a line in the statute regarding city districts, as I've highlighted here, that they are to be each be made up of contiguous precincts. I can tell you that line was specifically put in there to appease me, as well as my peers, but probably most particularly Representative Palmer knew when drafting it. I've opposed other legislation in the past where it involves splitting precincts because it causes us some real challenges. And I know Chairman Love is very familiar with this because she's personally navigated some of these issues. What happens is some precincts are going to be split inevitably just because the city boundaries don't align with our precincts. That's natural. But every instance where a precinct is split creates risk for us. And the best way to frame it is risk. It's making sure both the right voters get the right ballots and increases the cost because we have to print now multiple versions of ballots in the same geographic area, because precincts, realistically, all they are is a logistical tool for us to administer elections. It allows us to get a certain amount of supplies and a list of voters and provide a common polling location for voters to head to. And when we start dividing those, we can have multiple variations of a ballot in a single precinct. To give you the best example, because this is what always comes to mind, is the risk is I'm not the one generally administering our election laws. That seems strange. I mean, I am definitely a junkie when it comes to this. The person who is probably one of your neighbors, right? Or even a parent or friend. It's our poll workers. We do pay them, but it's a community service that they're performing. It's a long day. We do provide training to them, but as you can probably appreciate, elections are getting more and more complicated, more and more difficult. And we ask a lot of them in terms of administering these laws. And that includes on issuing ballots and making sure the right ballot goes to the right voter. And so we develop systems, but they have to figure out and make sure whatever city council district this is, right? If they're all within one precinct, they only have one ballot. Right? They'll give the ballot for that precinct and the city council members, that's what they'll get to vote on. But if we introduce a split, all of a sudden we have multiple ballots and we have the risk of issuing the wrong ballot to the wrong person. The example I refer to most, it happened in 2013. It was the city of Eagle had a bond on their ballot to purchase Eagle City Hall. Not super relevant to this, but there were also other elections going on at the same time because we do a bunch of different ones. And in that particular case, some poll workers at one of the precincts got confused and they started issuing A ballots to B voters and B ballots to A voters, right? The precincts were split. So it's the voters who live in the city and the voters who live out of the city getting the wrong ballots. We caught that right away, first thing in the morning. So polls open at 8. By 8:30, we had caught the mistake and fixed it. And anytime we find an error like this, we document it just in case it becomes relevant later on. Well, in this particular instance, the city bond failed by 27 votes. Yeah, this is why in elections we pray for wide margins. And we were able to ascertain when we went back and looked that more than 27 ballots had been issued in error. When that happens, the only solution is for a redo. It was a $180,000 mistake. The cost of our operations are a lot larger and more expensive than people realize. Right. And so I share that with poll workers and others just to show it doesn't feel that big when we're having some of these conversations, but on our side, when we're actually doing it and a mistake is made, the consequences are really big. Right. Let alone, you can appreciate if a city council election doesn't go well and we have an error like that, again, it erodes trust because a couple of things. One is people, they lose confidence in just the elections process at large when mistakes like that happen, and it affects the outcome, right? And you're going to hear from people along the way who I think, for whatever reason, issue with the city, they have frustrations in some form or fashion. The other part of that is when we do redo an election, we can never replicate the circumstances, right? The fact that happened and people know the results, it changes. So you're not going to get the quote unquote correct result by doing it over again. You're just because turnout will always be different. The timing is different. The campaigns are different. A lot of things change as a result of that, which is why it's so important to us to try and make it as simple as possible so that we can get the election right every time. And that really is at the core of our interest in this. And for us, in the case of the work you're doing, it's those precinct shapes that really matter the most. One of the things that helps you, and it helps and makes it a little bit more challenging, is following the 2020 census, we updated all of our precincts. We expanded we added 50 precincts countywide because of the increase in population, and that includes in the city. So our precinct sizes shrank. So that means you're able to have a little bit more flexibility with those precincts. The downside is the census blocks, right? So when you're looking at population numbers, it's kind of an out of order of events, but the US Census Bureau takes precincts into consideration when they draw census blocks, but they're relying on the 2018 precincts, not the 2022 precincts. So, and we start from scratch when we redraw the precincts. It's just more practical for us to start from scratch and rebalance. And so we've done that. Finally, I'll just show you, because I know one of the main purpose is representation, and specifically the concept of one person, one vote, right? And so trying to balance it, both the statute as well as constitutional provisions require that for equal protection, that you have one person, one vote, or as close as practical. We are agnostic in terms of what the city districts look like. We do not care. We just would like them to match precincts. And so that's really my request today. But just to demonstrate, we've played with the information. In the past, we've done this for CWI when they districted, we assisted them. Most recently, we assisted the city of Meridian while they were doing their districts. And I think they were in a similar position to you. They were getting a lot of feedback. And we pointed out, like, look, we can use precincts. And if you start to just look at the precincts as puzzle pieces, and you're just trying to find whatever set of combinations you feel best or makes the most sense, from my perspective, is the best way. And it also fits with what the legislative intent of this statute was. And so just quick, again, I'm not recommending these, but I want to show you because we've played around with it a little bit. We've built, we basically looked at the old map from last year and said, hey, can we come up with similar-ish districts? This is just to show that there are examples using the current information and population data. So in this case, you can see the deviation between districts and population is it's basically 7%, right? So here's one example. Again, this is different than what last year's maps were, but close-ish. Similarly, here's another variation up to 9%. And I think most impressive from our office is this. Here's an instance where we've gotten it down to 2.5, below 2.5. I share this with you mainly to point out, because usually the first response we hear when we say precincts is, oh, we would love to do precincts, but we can't get it within the population. I'm just here to say, yes, you can. I've been through this exercise numerous times now. And so I encourage you to work with Eric and team. And I know you guys will be seeking community input, at least from what I've heard, right, is to encourage the community when they're doing it to take this into consideration as well, because this really is that output. And what this information will be used for is to administer the elections at the end of this entire process. So with that, any questions that I can provide, at least from an elections perspective?
Chair Love, I have a question. How often are the precincts redrawn? Then is it every 2 years or?
Great questions.
Balanced, I mean?
In the grander concept, just like what you are doing, it's every census. It's after every census, we'll redraw all of the precincts. In between the censuses, we may split precincts because population grows. For the purposes of the city of Boise, that's pretty rare. Because of the density of the city, there isn't much need. Where we end up splitting precincts, and actually I think one of the people who did it last time was Chairwoman Love, is like out Western Meridian. So it's area where you have farmland, there aren't people, and all of a sudden you get 2,000 people. And it's like, okay, we can no longer handle that many people in a polling place. So we will do that every 2 years as needed. But even over the course of the last decade, I'm trying to think, it's probably less than 10 precincts that we adjusted over that entire decade. But after each census, after the legislative districts are drawn, we redraw them because we're required to match our precincts to the legislative districts.
Madam Chair, I have a question. And I don't know if it's so much for Phil or if it's for Hannah or for the esteemed attorneys behind us, but I think one of the questions that I have is sort of how the commission can interact with the county elections office to ensure that, you know, we're not maybe getting your blessing by any chance, but we're sort of ensuring that we're checking the boxes just so that whatever goes to council for approval is really also meeting the needs and, you know, upkeeping the integrity of the elections process. Is that something that the staff will do? Is it something that we reach out to Phil to kind of look at? How do we envision kind of the communication between the two entities?
I'd say Hannah can weigh in as well. I'm open to answer questions along the way or assist. We do that at the state level, right? So even the state redistricting process, they will provide us maps in advance to review. So we can, there was a great example, this was a decade ago when they drew it, where I asked them to move a line because they had voters up Bogus Basin Road that would have to drive an hour and 45 minutes to their polling location. And I said, if you just move the line this way, they all of a sudden only have to drive 20 minutes, right? Okay. That's not going to happen in your context. Geography is vastly different, but we're happy to, after you've come up with the general map, just to make sure, kind of like those oddities that that I showed, that those don't exist, we're happy to assist.
Okay.
And Chair Love and Vice Chair Perry, in our policy, in our districting policy, we have written in there that we'll coordinate with the county. So we'll be in touch and either ask you back or get feedback, and I can bring that back to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, if I have a question that's directed more towards Eric, but it applies to this situation. Do we have the detail in our tool to get down to look at situations that were described where you're looking at a neighborhood and houses? Do you know?
I can show you, that might answer your question better. It's my turn to present. I can show you how much detail you can get into.
Okay, I think that would be important. It is important. Yeah.
And I'll say, I mean, we've worked closely with Eric in the past, and we're happy to, between us and the assessor's office, can easily provide. I mean, I think you have that detail. So
Yes, yeah. Odds are we'll provide them with highlight the detail. It won't be a PDF map. We saw it.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, Phil.
yeah, here's my contact information in case anyone needs it. Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll move on to our presentation from Eric on the mapping software.
Bear with me just a moment, please. It's always when you're doing a live demo, isn't it? All right, forgive me, this thing timed out. It's going to force me to do this again.
No pressure, Eric.
No worries. You will have these same challenges too when you use this tool. There we go. So thank you, commissioners. I know you all had an opportunity to test drive this. It wasn't 100% functional, but we had 80%. It was enough just to get a feel for this is how the tool looks and feels and operates. But I do know there were some key functions that needed to be set up, and they should be ready to go as of about an hour before this meeting. So I appreciate your patience. I know you've been eagerly awaiting. I'm going to open up a plan just to test one that I put together, just to show you the functionality. This is not anything that is something that I would actually submit. But this is the same tool that the public will have access to as well. I do know that you were very interested in saying we need to see where the county precincts are and the neighborhood associations. They come up to display, you'll go to layers. These are now available where they weren't up until an hour ago. You can turn these on and they will be available in the background. And as you zoom in, you can get some more detail. The blocks that are shown here, 99% of the time follow roadways. However, it does not show individual parcels. It is technically possible for me to get parcels in here. I'd have to work with the vendor and we could put the property in there to help get an idea of how many parcels we're talking about. However, you could just look at the population just to get an idea of the density of the population that's in there. There is more background information we could put in here. I would ask that if we do that, take a look and see, does that answer your question or does that just clutter up the point of this particular map? And then we'll switch over to the county precincts. I can say off the cuff, it will be significantly easier to match the county precincts during this exercise than it will be to match it up with the neighborhood associations. As was alluded to before, those boundaries were drafted with totally different ideas in mind. It was almost irregardless of population. It's whatever those neighborhood associations at the time felt that this is an area that we want to capture and represent. There will be a lot of cases where we might be able to match, but in general, it will be difficult to do across the board, particularly as you start getting into the urban center. Other information that was asked for was to show additional race and ethnicity. So these are the common breakdowns that you'll see in a lot of demographic analysis. Those were not available earlier today, but they are now. So along with the population, as you start modifying districts, you will get live feedback about what does the breakdown look like when you look at race and ethnicity, should you choose to. You can also turn those off if you do not want them to be a factor in your considerations. This goes for the public as well. The information is there for those that want to assess that. So my goal today was not to showcase all the different tools. I know you've had a chance to look at it. I can entertain any questions that you have. There were 3 questions that came up during the initial test drive that I wanted to answer. One was about residency validation. So as it stands, this solution does not check the residency for anyone that submits a plan. It won't stop anybody from submitting a plan. However, when an individual goes to share a plan, they say, I want to submit this to administrators. Now, granted, this is coming up saying that we're violating the 10% rule. They're required to fill out this information. This gets sent directly to me. So I get notification that a plan has been officially submitted by someone, anyone. And so long as they are truthful with the information they put in here, I can validate if the address that they're associating with the plan for who to represent them is within the city limits. But that is something I would look towards the commission about who gets to submit a plan, who doesn't. If somebody that's over on the East Coast, they could get access to this. It's going to be a publicly available web address. They can submit a plan. Those could come in. I would be surprised if we get a lot of that, but the capability is there. The other question that came up is, can somebody submit multiple plans? And yes, they can. Somebody could put in 1, somebody could put in 12. They could also resubmit plans. So they could make a submission. Then within the feedback period, if they decide to make a change, they could take that, this original submission, make modifications and resubmit it. The last submission they put in would be the one we would count, but we will have a record saying that, all right, they submitted twice, but they altered their plan. The other thing that was asked was about the review process. This solution does have a way to review all the plans that have been submitted. It was not very elegant. I would not recommend it. We were going to operate with the assumption from the get-go with this that we will extract information, preserve it as it was captured through this tool, and I've got better tools that I can use that will be very transparent, publicly available, much easier to sift through the different proposals that come through. This solution would be very tedious and also opens, unfortunately, the way it's set up. If you set up a review, you set it up in an edit mode. So it's like an open Word document that anybody could edit once they look at it. That's very dangerous to do in this situation, which is another reason I will not recommend it. But anything that's submitted, we can make available. That part, if that responsibility falls to me, we can take care of that.
Madam Chair, for a question. Eric, thank you so much. I know this has been a huge project for you to undertake. Can you confirm if the vendor was using the 2020, the current precincts for the county? Just hearing that they have recently added 50 or so. I just want to make sure that they're using not the old precincts, but they're using the current precincts.
It was the data that was published on Ada County's open data site, and it said 2020 precinct data. So it is current. Yes, I supplied that information to them. Okay, if that's the case, I will look to your office.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions about the software? I actually had a quick question. Is there any way, because one thing when I've used this software is that you don't see streets very well at all in the base layer, or if you select the layer, it's very difficult to see. And I think that having streets just as much as precincts is kind of an important element. And so I'm wondering if there is any way we can, if that they've improved that, or if there's any way to make it bigger, bolder, because it takes takes a microglass to see that. So
Understood. The layer that they do provide in here is one that we can toggle on and off. It predominantly shows the street names. The short answer is yes. I will talk with the vendor. I might ask if we can provide, let's say, the primary streets, so the major corridors, just to help provide a frame of reference. As you get in deeper into a neighborhood, making everything stick out really bold might get a little bit difficult. So
Yeah,
you have some
especially-
flexibility with that.
especially for the public, when they get their hands on this, they might not be as familiar, say, as the rest of us are with the streets. So I think that would be really important to look at. Because like Phil said, we definitely don't want them cutting up neighborhoods so much. Then we kind of want them to stick to that. And I think especially if they don't stick to precincts, we at least want them to stick to roads to make it easier for us. Any other questions?
I could add to that. It says that the scale for the streets, for example, is 1 to the 500,000. Is that the source is from the 1 to 500,000 maps?
No, the number that you're talking about that would be showing in the bottom left corner is
Yeah.
simply the reference scale of the map, if I understand right? Or are you talking about what's showing up in
Yes,
the
mhm.
legend?
I'm talking about what's showing in the legend under the layers where it says street, and then display scale is 1 to 500,000. So that's a display scale. But if you zoom in, do you get a smaller scale?
No,
Bigger scale?
with this, I believe it's referring to, and I will double check with the vendor, but as you zoom out far enough, it will turn the roads off, because if it's going to try to label all the roads, and if we're looking at the map at this scale, if we try to label all the roads in here, it would be a cluttered mess.
Right.
So I think it's just an indication to say, once we zoom out that far, I'm going to turn off the roads, because you won't be able to make heads or tails of it.
Okay, but if you zoom in closer, it maintains the same level of density.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, it's more maybe a question for you or for Hannah, or maybe for Eric, is just sort of like what we should kind of expect the commissioners' next steps to do. Kind of when are we thinking we're ready to, clearly we might need to double check some things before it goes out to the public, which I know you're working on, Eric, but I just didn't know if you had expectations for commissioners on kind of what you envision as next steps as we prepare for the next meeting.
Well, I think kind of what in my thoughts were is that we would all work on plans this week. If you want to take a whack at it and do your own own districts, that would be ideal. So we can kind of come together and at least give examples to the public of what we're expecting and what we're looking at. And, you know, we can either make them shareable with the public or through the software. I think we could actually do that. Or we could actually just utilize what's out here already and have the public work off of that. Isn't that correct?
Yes, you could. Let me validate that that data is correct before we get in there, because we may have to do a reset and I don't want anybody to lose work they've invested a lot of time in. I may
Yeah.
need a day, possibly two.
Okay.
Chair Love, can I just add, based on your initial meeting and what you all decided schedule wise, we have a meeting next week and then there's a few weeks off, and that's I think there's a 2-week period where we planned to open up the tool for the public. So the next meeting is September 28th, assuming we can validate that the data is what we need it to be. And it's ready to go. We would open it up the day after on the 29th for the public. And I'm going to pull my calendar up while we're doing this. And then the meeting after that would be October 19th. So ideally we would open it up to the public September 29th and likely close it 2 weeks later on October 13th. That gives us some time to pull. I'll confirm that with Eric, but to pull that information out of the system and get it ready for you all for that following meeting.
And when would you need our maps by for the meeting next week? Did we decide that?
On a technical standpoint, I'm going to follow the timeline that you need. If I can't make it happen, I will let you know. But honestly, these data resolutions, I'm fairly confident within the next 2 days, we can get that up and running so that the tool will be functional, be a little bit easier to orient around Boise.
But I guess, sorry, let me clarify. When do we need to have our maps done for the agenda for next week is what I meant.
Chair Love, if I might ask Eric, if the commissioners have map proposals to you by Tuesday, early Tuesday of next week, would that be enough time for you to pull that out and be able to present them here
Yes,
on Wednesday evening?
yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? No, okay. Now if that is everything, it looks like we can adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn the September 21st, 2022 meeting?
So moved. Oh. Can we take questions?
Yeah, I think we have an extra minute here or two, so go ahead.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you come up? There's folks online listening. That way they can hear you.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Kathy Corliss, and I'm a resident in Boise and Southwest Boise. And I'm here tonight to hear about the process and how that's happening. Thank you very much for taking the work that you're doing and looking at this very seriously, because as Phil had said before, I think the other maps seem to be kind of just put out there and it was without any public input. My question is, for this next, are you guys looking at creating maps to have public input? Or are you looking for the public to create maps? Or how do you see that evolving?
I'll answer that. So a little bit of both. So we're going to create maps here, which we will present to the public. And if they want to give us feedback on those maps, they're welcome to. There will be an open meeting for the public in October sometime. But we're also asking the public to submit maps so we can find the absolute best option for the city. So like I said, it's a little bit of both. So if the public comments on ours and says, hey, we like this, but can you adjust it here, we'll get feedback that way. And then we'll also get public maps and we'll be able to comment on those as well.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. It does. I'm a little, I guess, I think the mapping process, no matter the software is, there's the rules with the 10%. I don't think a lot of people are really aware of that. So I guess it'll be interesting, but if we want public input, that's probably a good thing to do.
Madam Chair, and we share the same concern. Kathy, thanks for coming.
Yeah,
And
you bet.
I think there's going to be a goal where the commission website is going to, at best plain language possible, explain sort of what the ordinance requires. So it'll explain things like the population variance, aligning with precincts, trying to keep communities of interest together. So I think you're right. I think there will be a challenge, but I think we'll do our best, absolute best, to ensure that folks know what the process is. And it's modeled after similarly how the legislative redistricting just happened as well. So we're hopeful that we'll at least give enough guidance where you can play around enough and try your level best. But otherwise, your Chairman Love is actually very correct in that we'll just take public input on maps if you don't feel like drawing your own as well. So
Final question. Will the maps that Phil McGrain presented, will they be part of comment and input?
If they submit them for public record, then absolutely, but they would have to do that. So if they go through our software and submit it and present it to us as an option, they could
Be part of it.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Now with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. And is there any nays? Didn't think so. Adjourned.